Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And today I am so excited. I have Mike Bond back as a guest on Joy on Paper. He was here a few weeks ago. We were talking about his recent release, CRUDE, which is a great book. But today we're going to be concentrating on poetry because, as all of my viewers and listeners know, I love poetry. I am one of the few people who really promote poets because I think it's so important. And here's Mike. Hi.
Hi, Patsy. Nice to
Uh,
see you again.
It's nice to see you. And as I said, I love poetry. So today we're going to talk about another side of you. You spend a lot of time, you've been in business, you've done all sorts of exciting things in your life, and writing espionage thrillers and all of your other exciting books. But as I know, there's always time to just stop and write a poem, read a poem. I like very much both of your books. Joy is a book of poems filled with love. I know that this is a book that really means a great deal to you. So there are lots of poems in there that I'm sure will be very touching, and we'll read those. And then, of course, the other book. And I was intrigued by this book because there are a number of things that I discovered I knew about the book before I knew about the book because I've been to some of the locations that you write about. So this one is called The Drum That Beats Within Us. I think we'll start with that one. And I have the poems here and you can read them. But first, just give us a little intro to why poetry is important to you. I like what you wrote at the beginning of Joy.
Thank you very much, Patsy. And I'm delighted to be with you again and very appreciative of your commitment to poetry because poetry fills a void that otherwise would not be filled. It's a part of our spiritual life that otherwise we would miss. If we cannot in a few short lines explain to each other what most matters, then perhaps we don't know what most matters. And that's one of the virtues of poetry is it requires that we think about what matters as opposed to all of the foolishness that goes on in society today, has always gone on in society, no difference between now and any other time in human history. But I think what poetry does is it allows the spiritual side of ourselves to speak, even when we're speaking about relatively seemingly superficial things. That would be my take on it anyway.
It certainly does. That's why I read poetry almost every day. I've always done that. I just enjoy it. I find taking those few minutes in a day just it, it can be calming, whether you start in the morning or just before you go to bed. You have a book of poetry that you like. The wonderful thing about poetry books are you can open them wherever, and sometimes it's almost magical. You have a book of poetry, and then you open it exactly to the right spot.
Yep.
That's happened to me so many times. I will open a book of poetry and I'll say, wow, that's just what I needed today. I love that. There's always that excitement in it. Tell us about this first book, The Drum That Beats Within Us.
A selection from many years of writing poetry. I started out a long time ago with City Lights Books under a very pro poetry viewpoint, if you wish, and I continue to write poetry and not publish too much because publishing of poetry is like looking down the rat hole a bit. And there's so many poetry collections out there, and to a certain extent, they seem to follow the same mode and be interested in the same kind of poems, which I'm not necessarily interested in. As I point out in the foreword to The Drum That Beats Within Us, I'm not really interested in fancy poetry. If you want to write poetry, I think the first thing is you go out and get engaged in the world and you work. I was writing poetry when I was running a jackhammer for a living. I was also writing poetry when I was a candidate for the US Senate and later when I was an international diplomat and CEO. I think my number one message in The Drum That Beats Within Us in the forward is that everyone should write poetry. I feel that's really important. We get we stand in front of a mirror looking at our own soul when we write poetry. And I think that's important for everyone to do.
When you're writing poetry, you're writing it not on the computer. You write it by hand, and there's that connection between your brain and what you're doing with your hand and the paper, even where you're writing it. You might be in an airport, and suddenly just a little idea, and you can in a magazine you're carrying with you, because it's a thing that comes at a moment, and that's what's so exciting. And there are so many people, professional people, all sorts of people, truck drivers. I know a truck driver who writes poetry. I had a mailman who, as a matter of fact, he was a great Baldacci fan. He read everything that Baldacci ever wrote. He told me one day I could have a PhD in Baldacci. I didn't understand that at first, but he was serious. But then when he was had a moment, he was writing little poems. A mailman's life might not be that interesting. That's what
Well,
poetry
I
can
can
give you.
believe it. Yeah, I can believe it. In the past, a lot of poetry over many hundreds of years has been written by people who are fully engaged in something else as well. And it doesn't matter what that something else is. We don't all have to be poetry professors. In fact, I substantially don't recommend that. I don't generally read poetry from professors. But anyway, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm sure that mailman had some interesting things to say.
He did, actually. I've seen some of them. So here we're going to start with the drum that beats within us. Our first one, which you will read for us. Leaving Indian
What,
Caves, Montana.
would you like me to just give a little bit of
Yeah,
background on
exactly.
how I wrote it? Yeah, I was running for the U.S. Senate in Montana on the Democratic ticket, basically over issues relating to the environment and the position of women in politics. I was very pro expanding access of women to the top of our structure, political structure, as well as protecting the environment. But one day, and I actually hated TV interviews, and I had done a bunch of them one day, and I was in Billings, Montana, and I just happened to notice on the map that there was this Indian Caves, Montana protected site not too far from Billings. And so I drove out there and sat down and looked at it. It was beautiful. In fact, I wandered through it from one part to the other. And in the middle of it, I just sat down, I think on the back of a airplane voucher, this poem. And I've hardly ever changed it ever since.
Okay.
You're,
I'd love you
you're,
to read it.
okay. Leaving Indian Caves, Montana. Let me go to the book itself because maybe something's missing. Leaving Indian Caves, Montana. Let's have a final smoke in honor of this place and of the beauty that it shows despite the world's disgrace, and of the sanctity of life despite its sore abuse, and of the timelessness of time, the anguish of its use. Let's cast a final look of love above the yellowed rims, wherein the sharp and timber draws the daylight softly dims. Where silent in the deeper grass the burnished antelope graze like sage and boulders across a tawny slope. Time has stolen life from us, although life perseveres. We fall away like waves of stone eroded by our years. And when each stone has vanished, and as the cliff recedes, nothing marks its former place, the absence that it feeds. Our skin, is it the air? Our souls the grass? Truly is the earth our heart, as from the earth we pass.
I really like that. And I don't know how many politicians are writing poetry, but maybe it gives me hope for politicians. I don't know. Maybe more of them should do that because it's so
Well,
thoughtful.
I'm, I'm sure that J.D. Vance is probably, if I've read his book, and I'm sure he's
Yes.
written poems. I'm sure of it. Just a little background on this, too, before we go on to the next poem. I've always been very committed to understanding and appreciating the people who lived here in North America before the Europeans came. And I've always, in having lived a lot of my life in the very primitive parts of Montana, I was often up in the mountains by myself for a week or two, wandering, get on my horse and just go for days with a pack horse full of food and bedding behind me. It's so I'm very close to the people that lived in Indian caves. I just wanted to put that.
May I meet you there?
Yeah. And this, of course, it's a love poem, like many poems that I write about my wife, whom I've been with for 52 years. And so that's what it's about. May I meet you there. Life is simple, knowing the right words. You are the sun in my life, the joy in my heart, the gem in my soul. When I met you 12,600 days ago, I loved you from the first instant, the first look and sound of your voice. We are all sentenced to death, you say. What greater victory than to love another far more than oneself? The days fade like rain, poisoned like wolves on the prairie. Eagles fall from the skies. The sea dies before our eyes. If anything comes after, the hell and joy, may I meet you there.
Well, 52 years. That's pretty great.
Yeah, and in fact, it's longer than that. I wrote that poem a bunch of years ago, and now, of course, we've been together even longer. I have no idea. You have to multiply 52 times 365. So, anyway, thank you for letting me read that. It's one of the poems. I've written many poems about my wife or to my wife, and that's just one.
The next one is a short one, but it's interesting. Give us a background.
Yeah, I would. Much of my writing is related to the awareness of the likelihood of nuclear war and overall the ongoing destruction of all life on the planet, all animal life, sea life, everything, by humans, just as we continue to expand onto every little corner of the world and also to increase in population and thereby demand more in the way of natural resources and killing off, as a consequence, many other species. That's what this is about, mostly that what will happen after nuclear war, and which is coming unless we change our politics. And let me just get into the poem and read it. It's Hungry Magpie. A hungry magpie is a world out of order. When after so much killing, there's nothing left to die. The earth barren as the raw red skin of Mars. The seas deadly as the toxic skies. And to think one little biped did it all.
Yeah, it makes you think. It makes you think. As we listen to the news, it's we're torn. There are people who are desperately not listening to the news. They almost
Yeah.
can't listen to the news because
Oh
it
yeah.
is sometimes it's so overwhelming. But
Yeah.
as you mentioned, and of course talk about in your latest book, Crude, wow, we have things that are happening in the world that we do have to pay attention to.
Oh yeah, we definitely have. And that's why I wrote Crude to try to. I write a lot of books to try and draw attention to what is a significant issue facing the future of the human race. And certainly Crude fits that criterion, as does this poem, Hungry Magpie. It's saying basically human beings have erased a lot of life on Earth and all by ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's time we recognize that.
For people who, if they would just get back into nature and see the beauty of it, and not destroy things. For me, the destruction of the forests makes me so upset. To call timber biofuel,
Yeah,
just let's
yeah,
burn the trees. And I come from northern Michigan. It was all trees. It was, my whole life
yeah.
was running
Oh,
in the
yeah.
forest.
Mhm.
Now they've opened these enormous what's biofuel? Say, I'm burning the trees. This is so wrong. I hope that people will read your poems and realize we have to think a little deeper, a little harder, pay attention.
Yeah, what you said about biofuels is so important because definitely we are in the midst of some form of planet warming. There's no doubt about it. Many factors contribute. It's not just oil and gas. It's also the removal of vegetation from much of the earth. And because of the preoccupation with climate change, a bunch of totally scam campaigns or financial campaigns have arisen. And one of the worst, of course, is biofuel, because what a tree does is take carbon dioxide and convert it to oxygen, which is what we need to prevent climate warming. To burn it creates far more toxic gas than does burning oil and gas. So it's a double whammy, and it's entirely the hustlers that promote it and who buy their access to our congressmen and senators so that they pass these laws. The worst of all, of course, is windmills, which have absolutely no value in terms of actual energy production. They produce 4% of the electricity that they promise they'll produce. And I worked for many years in that, and I can get not as an installer of these things, but studying them. And it's typical where we have done something that has destroyed millions and millions of acres of prime, beautiful land in the United States in order to pay for a taxpayer funded scheme promoted by our congressmen and senators. It's ludicrous. But anyway, that's exactly what the problem with biofuels is.
One of the joys of poetry is that it can open your eyes. Now, the next one is interesting. DNA. Now,
Yeah.
this is different.
Again, it's to my wife or about my wife. That was written about 6 years ago because we've now been together 52 years. The poem is pretty simple. 46 years ago, I met you. Your fiery eyes, fierce mind, and beautiful body. I hungered so much to fill with mine. Don't know what you saw in me, but it was enough. Cherishing each other all through these years and down through ages to come. Worlds of promise and joy in every instant.
I like this poem because you use the word joy. I noticed that right
Oh,
away.
right. I was just going to say, Patsy, that one of the themes that shows up in my poems about love and my poems about my wife is the incredible challenge of realizing that we are going to lose each other, that death is coming, and is there any way that we can stay together after death? And is there anything after death? These are questions that, of course, preoccupy humans ever since we came down from the trees and maybe even before. But it's a very relevant question. Is there a way through deep love for another person to create some form of togetherness after death?
I think so. I think there's a magical spark that I think never dies.
I
Let's go to
hope,
the next
I
one.
hope.
Now, this takes us back to, I think you were in your politician day.
Yeah, I actually was just driving through Northern California on my way to Nevada, and ended up at Fort Bidwell is an Indian. I don't want to call it a reservation. It's where the white people shoved the Indians into a corner and forced them to lose all of their hunting and wandering ways. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you're working on a book about Fort Bidwell right now. Are you not?
Yes, yes. If my main character in my book comes from there.
That's amazing because it's not a place that a lot of people come from.
I
Um,
know.
and one of the important things is that the Modoc Indians had a big slice of northeastern California, and they continually harassed by the white settlers that coming in and taking over the country, and they continually fought them. And in a series of battles, these Indians killed over 250 soldiers, U.S. soldiers, who were trying to force them off the land without losing not a single Indian warrior was killed. They were so incredibly, what can I say, very smart and knew the country so well. But their leader at the time, his name was Captain Jack, according to the white coverage of him. And the only way that the whites ever finally won is they promised Captain Jack a peace and that he could maintain all of his tribe's lands. And when he went to meet them for the peace meeting, they arrested him and hung him. So that's to some degree what's the background of the poem. In the first line, these words are mine. That was a typical opening when a North American Indian or Native American would speak. She or he would start by saying, "These words are mine," meaning that she or he had thought about it and it was coming for her from her or his own spirit. So let me go ahead and read the poem. These words are mine. Fort Bidwell, by the way. These words are mine. The pines darkening in October snow, the road descending to an alkali plain, these few houses. Wind drives the owl from his daytime bed. Crystals form inside the window. The light of day is neutral. Smoke rises from the store chimney. But what to bring in cold, crippled fingers? What to barter for a stolen land? Captain Jack held back this day, trading lives in lava beds till his betrayal. We keep the wind, the water frozen in cast off tires, cinder blocks and tar shingles, the school at the road's end. It is Fort Bidwell in a closing year, a Modoc village against the mountain, a Plymouth stalled on the highway. Modoc, you are gone now. I beat you out of my heart with the slow, easy thunder of drums. The day lies and drifts across the road.
Yes, we took a lot away from them. Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah. Here we go. Here's another one, animal related. Crow. And it's just about I love crows and all of the bird family that like magpies, crows, ravens, they're all minor birds. They're all part of a very wise group of birds, very smart. Anyway, crow. Crow eases across the sky, tilting a wing to slide this way or that, easy as a dream. What does he see? This battered earth? Houses sterile as stones? Driveways, streets, green lawns, bright with poison. Flying so easy, life so dangerous and hard. Does he hate or only scorn us? Or is he simply waiting for us to die?
That poem will make you think. And the beautiful thing about poetry is if you are thinking about something, a crow flies across the sky, but then you look around, and of course, you right away, one of the things you mentioned here, green lawns bright with poison. I think it says so much in those few
Yeah,
lines.
it's just all of the poisons that we put on our lawns to kill the so-called weeds and make the grass bright. And it's poison and it kills. One of the major reasons why there are such sharp declines in our bird populations is that the herbicides that we put on our lawns, they kill the birds, as do the windmills. The other thing that is substantially decreasing bird life worldwide is the creation of these millions of tall evil towers where the, the blades circle at 200 miles an hour and just slaughter birds, particularly migrant birds. But anyway, this being a crow is not easy. That's my point. Yeah,
It's certainly not. It's certainly not.
yeah.
So let me see. Next one. This is interesting too. It's a short one.
Yeah, I've been in a number of wars, unfortunately, and some of my poetry is about war as a consequence because it's so amazingly traumatic in terms of what it does to oneself and to others. This is called the most evil thing, the most tragic thing humans do. is war. Our greatest joy is life's creation. The most evil is to call one the other. And what I mean in this poem, Patsy, is that we have a huge industry in the United States. The actual greatest industry and the largest industry in the United States, pretty much, is the U.S. war machine. And we have been, we create enormously expensive things to kill people. Years ago, I knew a scientist that had worked his life at Lawrence Livermore Lab in California. And he was proud of the fact that he had increased the number of times we could kill every Russian from 28 to 29. And even the media acts as if war is a great thrill. It's a great thrill when you're sitting in some office in New York writing copy for some person to read across a teleprompter. But war is atrocious. It's so painful what it does to people. In fact, the wars that the United States has created more wars in the last 100 years than any other country on earth. We have our war machine is extremely active in creating wars around the world, of which Ukraine, the U.S.-Russian war in Ukraine, is just the latest example, as well as the deteriorating situation in the Middle East, which we are again responsible for. But the media and the politicians act as if war is a good thing. You can see all kinds of, from the New York Times to MSNBC to CNN, beating the drum for war. We want more war. And that's what I mean. That the most evil thing is to call something good, which is evil. And our greatest joy is life creation, which is simply sex and family and love. So we replace it with killing other people as the most important thing. That's a beautiful picture. Wow. Wow, you got it down exactly.
Yes,
This is
Blue
just
Mountains.
it's a very short poem, but it has to do with our spirit wishing to be free from all of the insanity of today's technology and other requirements, everything from automobiles to the internet to God knows what. And when I was a kid, I always played hooky as much as I could, and I would go out and I would walk out of school in the morning just because I couldn't stand it anymore. And I just look at the landscape far away and want to be there. And that's what this comes from. Escape. Horses in bare fields. He watches from the edges under low branches. In the distance, blue mountains.
I feel sometimes for people who are city bred and city living and they've never been to a place like this or like to northern Michigan where the
Mhm.
sky is so big and the night
Yep.
there's no there, there's nothing to dim the stars. I recently told somebody about it that we used to just lay outside and just look and the sky was black except for the
Mhm.
dancing twinkling stars. People have to see beauty. I think it would really help a lot of people if they saw things like this because when you're out like out west in the mountains or places where there's nature and animals running free, it can change you.
Oh, it sure can. I think I feel very sorry for anybody who's grown up in a city and who lives. I lived in Manhattan for a while. I lived in San Francisco for a while. Lived in Paris for a while. Lived in Vienna for a while. And I love cities. They're fun. But you don't want to live there all your life, and you certainly don't want to raise your children in a city. It warps the mind. Warp is perhaps the wrong word. It limits one's understanding of the universe, and it also forces more preoccupation with other people than is deserved. We need to get outside of in our heads, outside of just being totally involved and preoccupied with people, into understanding the heartbeat of life, which is in the wilderness. It's not in the towns. I almost think it just occurred to me, Patsy, that we ought to limit voting to those people who don't live in cities because your entire understanding of everything is warped by living in a city.
Particularly today with people, not only are they in the city, they're on their devices so much, they have
Yeah.
no time. If they have no background as a child
Mhm.
of being in nature, of understanding the trees, of knowing the pure joy of being outside, and all they've learned is in the city and they're on their devices today, their minds are not well formed, if you ask me. They're missing something.
You're absolutely right. And when I look at this lovely picture that you have found of the horses running in when most of our sons were very young in Montana, they were on horseback before they could walk. And that forged in them. Not only did they come as they grew up with horses, did they understand these magical animals and understand that part of life, but they also were able to comprehend more easily the wide breadth of spiritual connection that we have with all animals if we'll only go and pay attention to it.
In previous years, many Americans had those summer homes, a cabin somewhere where they'd take off. They would spend part of the summer. And so the
Yep.
kids would have this opportunity to be outside, to run wild, to not be inundated with advertisements and all of this other stuff. But nowadays, of course, most people can't afford a second house, let alone a
Oh,
first
yeah.
house. So it's sad what they're missing. It really is. The minute I read this poem, Blue Mountains, I knew what photo I needed here because I knew what you were talking about.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you interpreted it perfectly, Patsy, as usual. So this poem is called Old Bones. Show me old bones, and I'll show you kingdoms lost, promises forsaken, the rags of fashion spent in worms and dust. Kissed lips and starry nights looking out over cities to the sea. Where, dirt, is your wonder now and joy at life's majesty? This one is just obviously about the fleeting insignificance of our own lives compared to the eternity thereafter. Um, and that the past, that when we look at the ruins of an old city, we must remember it was once filled with laughing children and lovers and people trying to make deals on sheep and on corn and people building houses out of mud and stone. All of these wonderful things that happened there, these people's completely full lives have vanished, just as our own full lives will vanish.
I've seen this happen when you mentioned towns because I was thinking about Detroit and how
Mhm.
beautiful Detroit was.
Yeah,
And
oh, yeah.
people, I was very young when we lived there, and I remember how beautiful it was, the tree lined streets, the lovely homes, the lovely buildings. And my favorite building, of course, was the library. When we moved from northern
Yeah.
Michigan and came to Detroit, it was the first time I saw a library. And that was everything to me. And then it just disappeared. And it's so sad. And this poem meant a lot to me. If you're writing poetry, you don't have to be published by a big publisher. Nowadays, it's so nice that if you're writing poetry, write your poetry, put it in a book, and your family will be proud of you. You'll be proud of yourself, and it's there for generations to come. And it's strange for me when I'm doing research, like for my book that I'm writing, set in 1875. And the treasure for me, the absolute treasure, is to find books written by just an ordinary person about their travels or poems they wrote. They weren't published by big publishers, but little publishing houses used to publish these kind of things. And your words live on. And that's the beauty. One of the things, and especially nowadays, words, I don't know how long human beings will last, but the words are out there somewhere. If somebody, another planet might discover them, but our words are there. Now, with the next book, of course, with joy, This, of course, I think was very close to your heart. Tell us about this, and then we'll go through some of the poems.
Thank you, Patsy. Again, it's just like you said earlier in our conversation, I have periods of time where sometimes I'll write 2 to 3 poems in a day, often late at night. And then it's not anything I control. It's something that comes to me. And this book, Joy, came to me precisely. The poems came to me over a rather brief period of time, but they represented an enormous growth and awareness on my own part about the nature of love and the nature of sharing with other people, and that there is such a thing as goodness and we can practice it. It came out of a very fertile time in my own head.
So it's Joy, Poems of Love, Life, and Fate. And we'll start with the first one.
Again, of course, this is about my wife. How lovely to hold your hand, to see your face across a table, a glass of wine, a room, to share children, a home, a life. It takes so little to bring joy into the world.
And any woman would be very honored to have somebody write a poem like that.
Thank you. I'm very lucky to have to be married with my wife, who is a great genius and very kind and loving and can do anything. But basically, what I'm saying is that in the poem is that we beat our heads against the wall trying to find things that are valuable. And people try to create more powerful careers. Idiots go out and buy yachts or private planes, or they buy a place in the Hamptons so they can show off to all the other people who are showing off. It's so ludicrous. It's so sad because these are people living without any connection to what's really important in life. And what's really important in life is caring and loving and family and protecting all people and all life on the earth. That's what joy is. Joy is simply that. I wanted to say in the poem that if you want to bring joy into the world, you don't go out and buy yourself a big yacht. You don't try to run a company. You don't do any of that. You just be enormously grateful for the joy of a person you love, a glass of wine, and to have children. Children
That's
are
it.
just such an incredibly great. That's what joy is, having children. And then if you're lucky to have grandchildren, you're unbelievably lucky.
Okay.
Yeah, the divine. We seek God elsewhere, in churches and stock markets, shopping malls, car dealers, wars and wisdom, while the divine is always with us, in the face of a loved one, the laugh of a child, the joy of a dog running wild in the woods, a bird singing from a treetop, a far view over mountains to the sea, a glass of wine or field of flowers. The ancients were right. God is always with us. We just have to notice. It's so true in my own life that I've been aware that it's a little bit like Alice in the Looking Glass, that we need to step through the mirror of ordinary life. And when we step through that mirror, we no longer see ourselves. Instead, we see the divinity of life, all life. And that's the path to be on.
Again, we're back to nature. I just wish more people could be out there in nature, out by the mountains, out in the forest, because it changes you.
One thing about this poem that's interesting too, from my own awareness, is the divine is found in the face of a loved one. The laugh of a child. My grandchildren, when they were little, some of them are pretty grown up now, but their laughter was just invigorating. It just brought me so much joy just listening to them talk and laugh. And the other thing, if the joy of a dog running wild in the woods, that is such an evocative image because most people that have dogs, the poor dogs are slaves. Several times a day, they get a collar put around their neck, which may be all there all the time, but on a chain, they get taken outside to find somewhere, often on concrete, to relieve themselves, and maybe a little walk on a chain on a city street, and then they go back into the jail of a house or a home. Dogs are basically wolves and they love to run and they're incredibly happy when they're out in the woods. My wife and I, even before we were married, I always had wolf dogs, German Shepherds or Belgian Shepherds. And we had a half wolf German Shepherd one time. And these dogs, the joy that you can see when they're running wild in the woods, it's something that somebody with a pet in a apartment building cannot even imagine the joy. Or a bird singing from the treetop, or just looking over mountains to the sea. There's so many things in life that are so joyous that they are proof of the divine. As I say in the quotation in the front of my book, Joy, let me get it out so I say it correctly. He's the Catholic scholar, Teilhard de Chardin, and he says, a great philosopher, he says, joy is the infallible sign of the presence of God. And again, God doesn't necessarily have to be viewed as this old fart sitting on a throne making decisions about the world. I think that's ludicrous. I don't pay much attention to the trappings of religion, but there is an incredible, powerful force in the universe, and we would be silly to ignore it, as I say in another poem in this book.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
that's the divine. God is always with us. The divine is always with us. We just have to step through the looking glass of self preoccupation to see it.
I think it's a great poem. I love it. And I like the line, the joy of a dog. And you're right. When they're running wild, they're having fun.
Yeah, they're in their element.
Ah,
This
here's
one, yeah, this one, I just wanted to touch base with reality here. It's called Danger. The tiger paces his cage, hoping against hope to get out. We watch outside the bars, safe in his imprisonment, touched almost by his sorrow, reaffirmed and comforted by our victory. Late one night, he finds a way after years of searching to get out. He is hungry. He hates. He is coming for you.
yeah. Ominous, a little bit ominous.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Basically, it's about spending our lives crushing the animal side of our lives, crushing the animals, destroying everything that's wild. And it's going to come back and get us. This one, War and Peace, is from my own experience. And again, as I've talked about earlier, war and peace. Once you know war, you will never know peace. And that is what I was saying before, Betsy, is that if you've been in a war, you're never going to be able to delete it from your memory. And it changes everything that you will live through going forward.
And it lasts. Men who have gone through war, I know my father, of course, went through the Battle of the Bulge. So that was always with him. But being from that generation, he never talked about it, other than
Yeah.
knowing that his feet were hurting 40 years after the war. They were still hurting because the Battle of the Bulge was such a horrific.
Oh,
Um,
oh my God. That was horrible. Horrible.
I've also been working over the years. I've been working with the F-105 warriors, the ones who flew in
Really?
Vietnam War. And the trauma is still with them. And of course, the suffering and the diseases that came out of what they did. So,
Yeah. We know many Navy pilots from Vietnam, and there isn't a single one of them that wasn't substantially wounded by what they did
yeah,
and have
exactly.
never gotten over it. Uh,
Now,
but
here's another
yeah.
one, which is a very short one. I had some thoughts about this one.
Oh, yeah. 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 This is called Laughing Girls. How soon laughing girls are bent old women. And that came from one time sitting in a sidewalk cafe in Paris where I lived for a long time. And this poor suffering old lady with a cane walked by, bent over. Obviously, every step was hurting her. And I thought, well, she must have been in her 80s. And I thought, hidden inside that woman, when we see that woman, we don't realize that her memories include young love, fantastic sexual pleasure, great joys of many kind, and that once very, she had youthful beauty, youthful charm, youthful comfort in her body, youthful athletic prowess, and, and all of that has vanished. I just think that when we look at old people, it's important to realize that they were not always bent and pained. They were once alive and in every sense, deeply in a way that they no longer can be. So it's just about recognizing reality.
But I put this photo here, which wasn't part of your book. So many older women still have those memories, and they are able to be filled with joy and really to throw their arms out and remember those times.
Oh, I totally believe it. This is not an anti old people poem. It's recognition that how fast this happens, that one moment you're young and full of life, and the next you're old and full of pain. It
That's why people
doesn't,
should live and try to just do all sorts of things in life, because you never know what is going to motivate you. You never know where you're going to meet somebody who's going to change your life. You have to get out there. Part of my whole goal here with Joy on Paper is to motivate people by getting them to read books, but not just to sit around reading books all the time, to get out there and actually share the books, talk about the
yes,
books, meet people,
yep.
go to places. And if you start writing books and you start doing research, it's amazing. So many of the authors who have been on my program, they started off, they wanted to write a book, say a memoir, and then they had to do the research for it.
Yeah.
They started, they thought, I have the letters from my grandmother, I'll just put this together in a book and make, and then they realized, oh, maybe I should go back to her hometown. And then the next thing they know, they go there and they meet some long lost all sorts of exciting things happen by writing. Because if you get out there and you meet people, you talk to people, you could have so much fun. The oldest person who's been on my program was Eugenia Lovett West, who celebrated her 100th birthday on Joy on Paper. And she had just
Wow.
written a book about cybercrime at the age of
Oh my
100.
goodness. Wow. That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, you were saying this too earlier, Patsy, when you were talking about the importance of getting out in the wild, getting out and with our feet on the ground. And that's part of denying old age restrictions. There's no reason too many people kind of closet themselves as they get older in an apartment or and don't continue to engage with others. It accelerates our aging. The more that we can go out and get involved in life, as you said, the younger we stay.
Exactly, exactly. So I just wanted to put that very joyful picture there.
I agree.
Now, this
I
one
agree.
is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. This let us all. Yeah. It's so obvious to me, but it needs to be said. Anyway, let us all. Kindness spreads, do one good thing, and another is given you. Unkindness spreads also, cause pain, and more pain is given you. Kindness heals pain, and pain kills kindness. So let us all be kind.
That's great. That's a great
It's true.
poem. I love that.
Thank you. And it's just obvious when you care about other people, when you're good to them, it, and one doesn't do it for selfish reasons, one does it because one loves people. But when you do that, the benefits come back to you many times over. And that's not the reason to do it, but it's one of the results. It's one of the things that happen. It's a poem based on my political and writing experience with the dangers of speaking the truth. And the poem is called Don't Speak. Don't speak the truth, and you will be lauded. You will be loved by a mob who think what they are told, or they will put you on the cross that they detest because they do not understand, because they do not feel except their own worthy sorrow. Don't speak the truth, or you will be silenced because the mob fears what they don't understand, hates love, hates attachment, hates everything they do not have, and they do not have anything. Thus, their hatred is vast. Go ahead, speak the truth. You will be blessed and crucified.
That's a very good poem. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's just a perception of the way our world seems to work right now is that the truth tellers are ostracized, whereas those who lie to us consistently get elected and praised.
Okay, now us guys. What's this one about?
This one is about how I feel, as opposed, it's partially, again, what's important in life, and from the guy point of view. And it's called Us Guys. How we loved football, fast cars, wild women, wild drugs, wild music, booze and fun. Loved hunting steep, rugged creeks and starlit prairies. Our rough, hard friends, and all that gave us life.
That's a nice rugged poem.
Well, it's the things that are fun are not the things that they tell you that on TV that are fun. Uh, for a guy, roughness and courage and experience and adventure are a very important part of life. And speaking of hunting, I would, for many years, a buddy of mine and I would take our horses up into the deep mountains north of Yellowstone National Park to bow hunt for 2 weeks. We'd go in 15 miles in from the nearest road and put up our little tent and hang our food up above the area where the bears could get it and just enjoy 2 weeks of being a Neolithic hunters. Again, football, I love, absolutely love football. And the only drawback is I now have many broken bones that cause me great pain. But my God, fast cars, I don't want anyone to get hurt in them, but I still have several fast cars that I absolutely adore and drive when it's safe, drive very well, very fast. So anyway, okay, we're on to the next one. Little things. This is another love poem. So anyway, we do little things for each other. Heat coffee water, move a pillow from a chair, buy something the other wanted but forgot. Out of such little things comes great love.
That's
And by that,
nice.
it's pretty obvious that a great love affair is built on the kindness of many moments and the love of many moments. And just to do a little thing with the person you love is as important as saying you love them. Love is easy to say, but doing it is something else.
Well,
So
Mike, thank you. Thank you so much for reading this poetry, for sharing it with us.
I very much enjoyed this discussion, and I hope it's been valuable for your listeners as well.
Thank you very much, Mike. And the recent release, CRUDE, is really great. Everybody, you should get that book. It's available online, and you can also find out about Mike's other books, including his books about Africa. It's Mike Bond's Books. You can go there and find out more about Mike and about his books. He's a poet and expert on writing espionage thrillers. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Patsy, and thanks for everything you do to make the world a better place. You take care.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye now. Bye.
Bye bye.
Okay, that was so much fun to talk to Mike Bond about his poetry. And of course, I hope that you will subscribe to Joy on Paper so that I can bring you more authors to share their stories about their books and about their careers and about their inspiration. And I hope that they will inspire you to write a book or at least start with a poem a day. And if you do that, you'll be proud of yourself. Write a poem a day about anything that is in your heart, is in your mind, and you never know. Have a collection of them, and one day you will publish them. Meanwhile, subscribe to Joy on Paper Live, and please comment. Authors really appreciate comments. An author will work sometimes for a year or 2 years on a book. They'll be concentrating on that, and then when the book comes out and it's released, they really appreciate a kind word. So please make a comment and make sure that you share with your friends and family because I hope to keep bringing you these interviews with authors. Thank you so much. Bye bye now.